Not all probiotics are created equal. New Purina Systemic Supplement remains live and active after the pelleting process and throughout the digestive system, making it all the way to the hind gut. Systemic was designed to support normal recovery after exercise and occasional gastrointestinal stress. Whether you're using a probiotic now or not, it's time to use a live and active supplement from a name you trust. Visit mq.purinamills.com to try Purina Systemic Probiotic Supplement today.
You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Greetings, everyone. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily, episode 1576, brought to you today by Equestrian Plus. Today's tip features Retired Racehorse Radio co-hosts Kristen and Joy, along with their guest, Dr. Maureen Kelleher, with a chat about equine keratoma, the hoof problem you've probably never heard of.
Recharge your training program with Equestrian Plus. Equestrian Plus brings together top riders, trainers, and professionals onto one video platform. Watch over 5,000 how-to training videos, clinic and event footage, exclusive training sessions, and more featuring top experts including 5-time dressage Olympian Stefan Peters, 5-time Olympic show jumper Ann Krasinski, Olympic eventer and silver medalist William Fox Pitt, and more. Join Equestrian Plus now and use promo code HRN15 for 15% off your first month. Visit equestrianplusplus.com to subscribe.
Well, Joy, I'm always excited to have guests on that we've gotten to meet in person, and that's not always the case, although we do love to just talk to anybody who wants to be on the show. But we have with us Dr. Maureen Kelleher from Ohio State University, who I met when she did the surgery on Shorty's keratoma in December. So Dr. Kelleher is the Associate Professor of Equine Medicine and Surgery at Ohio State and the Truman Chair in Equine Clinical Medicine and Surgery. So Dr. Kelleher, welcome to Retired Racehorse Radio.
Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So I have read a lot in the past, I don't know, like in the thoroughbred Facebook groups and stuff. And every now and then I'd see someone mention a keratoma and I was like, don't really know what that is. Never had to deal with it. Not my problem. And then suddenly it was my problem back in December. So listeners who have been following along, are familiar, I think, kind of with the bare bones of this story that, I had a horse that presented with abscesses over and over and over again on the same foot over the course of a few months. And we did various levels of diagnostics, and we can get more into that later. And he ended up going to see you at Ohio State. And I remember you called me and you're like, surprise, it's a keratoma. So I was like, cool. What is that?
Yeah.
So can you give us kind of an overview? Like, what is a keratoma?
Yeah, I may have to give a little bit of background first about the foot or the hoof. And I'm sure a lot of, especially equine horse people, have heard that the horse's hoof is very much like our fingernail, and our fingernail and their hoof is made of keratin. So that's one of the main proteins that make up that hard tissue that we know as a fingernail. And unlike us, their hoof tissue is much, much thicker and sturdier. And what happens if anybody has ever experienced, unfortunately, the condition of laminitis? So there's little interdigitations of tissue from the hoof that connect and interdigitate with the hoof tissue, and that's how the hoof and the coffin bone stay connected to each other. Well, in between there, we can get an overgrowth of the keratin, and that forms a little, for lack of a better way to put it, nugget or pearl of this keratin. And what happens is, as the foot grows down, it presses more and more on the coffin bone, and it creates local inflammation, and that local inflammation creates fluid and serum and pus that then breaks out the bottom or the top of the foot that looks like an abscess. So this little nugget stays in there and just continues to create inflammation and pressure on the coffin bone. And so you guys see an abscess, you treat it like an abscess, it gets better, and the horse does well for a little while, and then maybe a couple of weeks, a couple of months go by, and the same thing happens all over again. And eventually you get tired of treating abscesses in the same foot over and over again, and you investigate with some more diagnostics. So previously, before we had such great diagnostic imaging, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it would take a long time before a big cavitation or big defect would show up in the x-rays. Now we have digital x-rays, so we can really play around with the imaging. And so it's sometimes a little bit easier to pick up that there's some bone missing. And so we can catch them a lot sooner. And in your horse's case, I think I was maybe suspicious. However, I needed a little bit more proof. So we did a CAT scan or CT scan to really get an idea of what was going on. And in his case, confirmed that he did have one of these little nuggets of keratin pressing on the coffin bone and causing all his abscesses.
So, I mean, it sounds like such a simple little thing. Like, oh, it's just like a little, like a bead, or whatever, pearl nugget of keratin, but it is such a big problem. So how big is it? I'm looking at my own thumbnail. Are we talking thumbnail size or okay. So
good question. So it really varies from horse to horse. So in my career, I have seen some that a face, potentially the whole front aspect of the hoof, can really create a defect like this, a huge, I don't know, half a fist size or one of those little tangerines. They can get big. But I've also seen ones that are teensy tiny little guys that we would never have detected it unless we did an MRI. Obviously, those little tiny ones are much easier to treat than those big giant honkers that grow. And in that, if you were to just Google keratoma, you would see just huge defects in feet, or big patches with plates over them, or whole columns of hoof capsule missing. Certainly, some of that has to do with how big the keratoma is. Some of it has to do with the approach. When I was first going through my surgery residency ages ago, we always put these horses under general anesthesia. We always took out all of the hoof wall that was adjacent to the keratoma, regardless of its size. So there was always a pretty sizable defect in the hoof capsule. Fast forward a decade and a half or so, and now we're making small little holes and we're tunneling out just the bad stuff and keeping a lot of the hoof wall intact, which helps the hoof stay more stable and allows it to heal a bit quicker and with less complications, because we're not exposing the entire coffin bone to the outside world. So they can be very big, they can be very small. I would say the average size, yes, if you take your fingernail and make it a 3-dimensional blob, it's probably about, the average one is probably about that size.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I'm just sitting here staring at my own fingers now. Yeah. And I remember that, you're well, we caught this one early, so it's not super big. So, because it I'm thinking of something the size of a tangerine, where does that even fit in the foot? There's not that much space for these things in there. So yeah, that's wild.
The The ones that get that quite large like that will create a very huge distortion of the hoof capsule and sometimes encroach up over the coronary band. So it almost, in those cases, those ones almost look like really nasty, like tumors that you can kind of see a bit more externally because it's caused so much trauma and damage and has grown so big.
And how fast do they grow? Like, it's not like you'd come out and all of a sudden find that on your horse like tomorrow, right? Or would you?
Correct. No,
okay.
No.
I'm trying to decide, like, how much should we all stay awake at night worrying about this?
Actually, don't anybody stay awake at night worrying about this. I think it's a little bit more common now that we diagnose them actually a little bit earlier, as I said, because we have such good imaging available to us. And so anything that looks a little bit awry, we can, if we need more information, we can get a CT or an MRI pretty quickly and easily and get to it sooner. Now, the hard part is if there's a span of time, everybody who has a horse has probably experienced having a hoof abscess. So if Shorty has an abscess in August and then he doesn't have another abscess until November, do you really remember which foot it was in? You're probably like, well, it was a front foot. I know it was a front foot. Or it was a hind foot. I know it was a hind foot, but which hind foot? And then it doesn't happen again for another 3 months. And you're like, was it the left or the right? You might go 3 or 4 abscesses before you're like, okay, this is always the same foot. And then you get x-rays. And then, by that point, it might be a good size little nugget.
Okay.
Conversely, you could have a horse that doesn't have any drainage, but has some lameness, some low grade lameness that, say, blocks to a heel block. And we don't see much on x-rays at all because it hasn't manifested radiographically yet, but they can't quite seem to get this horse comfortable. They've tried coffin joint injections, they've tried shoeing changes, they tried this, and the horse is not getting better. And they send it in for MRI, and lo and behold, it's a keratoma. So there is the possibility that we can find these little tiny ones, not because they're causing abscesses, but because they're causing lameness. So the smaller ones, I think, have more of that history. The medium, or the average size ones and greater, tend to have been hanging around for a little bit longer and creating these little abscesses that, all of us, oh, he's got an abscess. You just treat it and you go on with life. So it's not until you start to recognize, hey, this keeps happening in the same foot. Or why does this keep happening in the same foot? Additionally, because depending on where that keratoma starts, there's hoof everywhere. And so it could start on any of that surface of the hoof wall that we see. And it could start up high, closer to the coronary band, which means it's going to take longer for it to grow down. It's going to get pushed down with hoof growth, but that also gives it more time to compress on the coffin bone and create a problem. But if it starts, for example, I had a horse in the summer that it actually didn't start until about halfway or 3/4 of the way down the foot away from the coronary band. So the tunnel that we had to make surgically to get that keratoma out was much smaller than, say, Shorty's, which started closer to the coronary band and was growing down and causing more compression on the coffin bone. So the other horse was having more lameness issues, whereas Shorty was having more abscess issues because the continual inflammation based on where it was starting and growing down, it had more time to have that inflammation create some necrosis and fluid and pus buildup that needed to go somewhere, and it either busts out the coronary band or it drains, it works its way out and comes out as an abscess. Now, if it's not caught, if the recurrent abscesses keep happening, nobody sees it or recognizes it or anything, sometimes it will get to the point where that keratoma has grown to the solar surface, and we can actually see a circular defect on the solar surface of the foot. Yeah. So, and those ones, it's a little bit more slam dunk. I know where I gotta go because I can see it. But there's also been probably tons of hoof damage by that point, and those are ones that are going to need like almost like a subtotal hoof wall resection.
Oof. Okay. So this is not the kind of thing where it's like, wait and see if it grows out. Like they don't grow out. They will just continue to sort of destroy the foot.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are keratomas, so I don't want to scare everybody. If you do send your horse off for an MRI for a lameness issue, and you might happen to read the radiology report, and they may say, oh, there's a keratoma here. They will get they're all benign in the grand scheme of things, because it's not a malignant tumor that's going to spread around the body or anything like that. But they can form little nuggets of keratoma that don't cause any lameness, don't cause any abscesses, and they're just incidental findings. And those ones will grow out, and no big deal. It's the one, yeah, okay. Yeah. It's the ones that are close, have close association with the coffin bone. That's going to create some pressure and create inflammation and create that serum and pus that needs to come out and create an abscess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I thought it'd be helpful, like maybe to kind of like walk people through the timeline, on how we got to where we are. So, and if I remember correctly, it was like about September. And it's hard to say for sure because I'm not very good about writing these things down. Like I probably should as a horse owner, as to like when things start. But September, October, Shorty had, what looked like an abscess in the right hind, because he is usually good for an abscess every fall when the weather starts to get wet again. So we're like, oh, here we go. It's Shorty's fall abscess. Because he went from like perfectly sound and happy to like hobbling around on that right hind. We were like, oh, that's pretty abscessy. So treated it for an abscess, never saw anything burst, but he got sound. So we're like, okay, well, cool. It must have blown somewhere and I just can't find it, or it reabsorbed. And then throughout the fall, he did that 2 more times. And by the 3rd time, I was like, that's it. That's enough times. Like it's been in that same foot every time. So we called our clinic in New York that we haul into for x-rays. And I was like, listen, I've had this abscess. It's getting worse. And I can actually kind of see a deformity, like coming out the coronary band in the front of the foot. So I have a feeling it's going to blow, but I would just feel better if we got x-rays on the books. And they were like, sure, bring them up. So of course, the morning that we bring them up, it did blow out the top, and then it also blew out the toe. So I was like, well, this is cool. It's draining top and bottom. I've never seen that before. That's exciting. And our vet up there, she probably took 30 different pictures because she was very invested at this point in trying to figure it out. Because once she started taking x-rays, the abscess track looked like an amoeba in the foot. Like it went, she's like, I've never seen one do this. Like it was going around the side and it was going up and down and around the other side. And like, she's like, normally it's like this little tiny line and he's got this giant thing. So something crazy is going on in here. So, so we, wrapped the bejesus out of that foot and sent him back home again. And she's like, well, we're going to send these on to OSU for a consult. So you'll hear from them soon. Because her initial fear was that it was osteomyelitis, which would have been like an infection in the coffin bone, which would have been quite serious. So we were like, well, fingers crossed it's not that, but we'll see. So, and then took him to OSU, and fortunately it was not that. And then, yeah, you found the keratoma. So, and yeah, you like pretty much tunneled through the foot. So I had seen lots of pictures, of these big dramatic hoof resectionings, where there's this big arch kind of taken out of the front or the side. And you were like, yep, it's cool. It like opens top to bottom. And I was like, oh, this is like way less, it's obviously invasive in that there's a tunnel through my horse's foot, but it's like much less invasive, than what I was expecting. So, so how does that work? I mean, how do you physically do that?
Good question. So, so I had the CT and was able to, sort of use the CT to sort of know where the start of it was. And I knew that I was going to have to tunnel it to the toe to get all the abnormal keratin tissue out of there. So once I have, it localized on the foot based on the CT, I use a Dremel and I create the circular defect on the hoof wall until I get to that column of abnormal tissue, and then I just kind of tunnel down. Have a couple of different instruments. We use a variety of debriding instruments to create the tunnel, and then just to make sure that we've gotten all the abnormal keratin tissue out. In his case, he did not have a lot of bone damage or bone trauma, so I didn't have to really do too much to clean up the bone. Just getting the keratoma off, out of there, off the bone, is what the bone needed. But to just take a quick step back, the osteomyelitis, yes, would be like the more worst case scenario. And they can be sometimes difficult to distinguish from each other. So the classic keratoma on an X-ray is very circular, scooped out, even margined, whereas osteomyelitis is not. It's very kind of eaten up and not very smooth and contoured. But in the early stages of a keratoma, it's going to be before it becomes this nice uniform looking defect in the coffin bone on X-rays. It's going to look fuzzy and weird. So again, since we have all this technology now, we're catching them earlier, but there's been open drainage, it's blown out the top, or it's blown out the bottom, or it's blown out both ends, and that what's blowing out is pus. So you have to worry that there may be an infection in there. But it's always good to go, oh no, it's not an infection, it's just keratoma.
Yeah, that was like the happiest call I had gotten. I was like, oh, good. Because otherwise, you're talking about like debriding the actual coffin bone, and that's like, much more invasive and longer layup and everything. So, and then, you're like, he really just needs about 30 days in a dry stall to kind of regrow foot. And of course, I sent him down to friends in Kentucky because I just anticipated that if I tried to stall him at home, it was just going to be a disaster. He would be jumping over walls and throwing himself out of windows and stuff because he's just that kind of guy. So sending him somewhere like a completely new environment was the best case scenario for him. So I didn't get to see a lot of like the changes day to day. My friends were pretty good about sending me photos like every couple days when they changed the bandage out. And it was gnarly to look at, like, again, and you too, you were getting the same photos just to kind of check on his progress. And it was very strange to look into the foot. So can you describe to us like what it was that you were looking for? Because to me, I was just like, oh, every time I saw it, I was like, and you're like, this looks great. And I was like, I'll take your word for it because it looks really scary to me. So
I mean, it's a wound, so we're always going to have a little bit of the white blood cells in the body are going to come clean up debris. But what I was looking for is the formation of granulation tissue. So that's like one of the first tissues that comes in to heal a wound. And that tissue is usually like a nice, healthy, vibrant pink tissue color. And then over time, that granulation tissue becomes waxy. And then becomes more keratinized. So I was just making sure that it was nice, pretty looking, plump granulation tissue, rather than what I wouldn't want is like gray tissue or really like purpley black tissue that indicated that things weren't healing or something was necrotic or secondarily infected, and I wasn't getting that good ingrowth of healthy tissue. So your friend did a great job with videoing it, like moving the camera around and giving us a good virtual tour of the defect, the wounds. And I could see that pink tissue growing up out, up and into the column. And so I was very happy with that.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah. Cause it was just that's one of those things like you're not supposed to see the inside there. So I was like, I don't like this at all. So, but yeah, glad that looked good to you. So, one of the kind of continuing challenges, of course, is that the bottom tunnel happens to be under where the shoe sits. So so he ended up staying like kind of an extra 30 days, partially because, my friends down there were like, we have not worked with one of these. We're not like super comfortable, like turning him out quite yet. And I was like, you know what, that's fine. Err on the side of caution. Like we've come this far, like we'll take our time. And they ended up having the Root and Riddle podiatrist come out, because they're in central Kentucky. So it's very easy. And now he's put a different shoe on and then he's patched over the top. So I still can't see it. So I arrived at OSU right after he got the shoe on to pick him up. And then I'm like, there's still a shoe on it. So I have yet to be able to like, and at this point I probably I can no longer see like top to bottom, right? Like that should have grown in.
Yeah.
Sort of in the middle out. All right. Correct. Good deal.
Yep.
So if we take everything off when he's due for his next shoe and I can see through it, that's a problem. Good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And it's the patch on the top is, just saves you guys from having to keep that hole from getting junk in it. So it's probably in the long run cheaper than wrapping it with elasticon all the time. And then as the foot grows out, it's probably just a little fill in again to avoid stuff getting stuck up in the defect as everything grows down and out.
Yeah. So, and I've been keeping my farrier updated, and she's, I think, looking forward. She's excited to like get a look at it and get her hands on it, because she's relatively new to the profession, and I don't think she's worked with one of these before either. So, like, how common are they? I mean, like, how many do you see in a year?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say personally, I probably see 2 or 3, but I think as a surgery service, we probably see, I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 a month, over the course of a year. Yeah, it's not that common.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say I need this in different terms too, because I'm like, well, out of how many surgeries are you doing? So, so not super common. So if you have a horse with, a recurring abscess, that doesn't necessarily need to be your first red flag. Like, oh my God, it's a keratoma. Maybe.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Although I would say if you're treating an abscess in a 3 to 4 month period, if you have an abscess in the same foot that looks like it's coming from the same area, I would have your vet come out and take x-rays.
Yeah.
Just to be on the safe side.
Are the easiest and compared to everything else, cheapest way to figure out what's really going on in there. So
yeah. Correct.
Now, do you think that they are more common in thoroughbreds, or is this just coincidence that I have a thoroughbred and my friends all have thoroughbreds because we're all thoroughbred?
I think it's probably a coincidence because you're a thoroughbred person. I have treated quarter horses, draft horses, Irish horses. Yeah, I don't think, honestly, I don't know, but I don't think there's any breed predilections in the literature, and I can't say that I think thoroughbred when I think keratoma. I just think horse with a hoof, keratoma.
I mean, that's too bad for all of us who love horses, because they are always finding elaborate ways to try to off themselves. But that's good to know that it's not any better or worse for thoroughbreds. So awesome.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Dr. Kelleher, this has been super interesting. We will have to pick your brain on what your other like favorite surgeries are to do, because we'd love to have you come back on and talk about more. But yeah, this was a fun, like, real life one, since I just went through this.
Yeah.
And you very nicely went through it with me. So yeah, thanks very much for sharing all that. And what's a good resource if listeners want to learn more about keratomas? Do you have any resources off the top of your head?
I would say I don't have any off the top of my head, but I would make sure that it's a good, reputable source, like a university or like the American Farrier Association or something like that, rather than somebody's personal experience who may just be taking liberty with their with their web access.
Yeah, I'm just here as the gateway. Here as the gateway.
Exactly.
I have experienced it now, so listeners don't have to, but I am not the resource. Dr. Kelleher is the resource. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been super fun, especially now that he is home and in one piece. It's much more fun than it was 2 months ago. So
awesome. Yes. Makes me happy too.
Well, there you have it. Horse Radio Network has thousands of engaging podcasts for horse people, and you can have them sent right to your phone. Just subscribe via your favorite podcast player. This is Coach Jen, and I will be back again soon with another tip. Until then, go ride your horse. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements made by guests on the Horse Tip Daily. Please use your own judgment when listening to the tips on this show.